Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible in your own skin? To be seen as the enemy by both sides of a war you never chose to fight? This is the story of Sachiko Kimura, a Japanese-American woman who became a prisoner of war in her ancestral homeland, and the American nurse whose 3 whispered words changed everything. August 1941. Los Angeles was still bathed in the golden glow of peacetime, though shadows were gathering on the horizon. Sachiko Kimura stood in her 3rd grade classroom at Lincoln Elementary, watching her students practice their cursive letters. At 24, she had everything she'd worked for: a teaching certificate, a small apartment in Little Tokyo, and the respect of her community. But when her grandmother in Hiroshima fell gravely ill, Sachiko made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She booked passage on a steamship bound for Japan, planning to return before the new school year began. She never made it back. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burned, and with it, any hope Sachiko had of returning home. Overnight, she transformed from a visiting granddaughter into an enemy alien in the eyes of the Japanese authorities. Her American passport, once a symbol of freedom, became evidence of potential espionage. The Kempeitai, Japan's military police, came for her on a rain-soaked morning in January 1942. They dragged her from her grandmother's home as the old woman wept, her frail hands reaching out helplessly. Sachiko's last memory of freedom was the smell of her grandmother's kitchen, the scent of miso soup and pickled vegetables, a comfort she would dream about for years to come. The interrogation room was a concrete box with a single light bulb that never turned off. For 3 weeks they questioned her. Where were the American military installations? What intelligence had she gathered? Who were her contacts? Sachiko answered truthfully, desperately, that she was just a schoolteacher, that she knew nothing of military secrets. But truth meant nothing when suspicion was more convenient. They beat her with bamboo rods until her back was a canvas of purple and black. They deprived her of sleep, forcing her to stand for days until her legs gave out. And when she still had no intelligence to offer, they sent her to a detention facility in the mountains of Nagano Prefecture. The camp was a collection of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. Sachiko was one of 40 women held there, a mix of Western missionaries, journalists, and dual citizens like herself, who'd been caught on the wrong side of history. The guards treated them with casual cruelty, their contempt sharpened by Japan's early victories in the Pacific. The women were given thin rice gruel twice a day, barely enough to sustain life. They slept on wooden platforms with threadbare blankets that did nothing against the mountain cold. Disease spread rapidly in the cramped quarters. Dysentery, tuberculosis, and pneumonia claimed women with brutal efficiency. It was in this place of despair that Sachiko met Ayako Fujimoto. Ayako was a journalist from Seattle who had been covering the rising tensions in Asia when war broke out. She was 32 with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a dry sense of humor that became their shield against madness. Ayako took Sachiko under her wing, teaching her how to survive, how to make the gruel last longer by eating slowly, how to exercise in tiny movements to keep muscles from atrophying, how to hide any sign of weakness from the guards because weakness invited abuse. Most importantly, Ayako taught Sachiko how to hold on to herself, to remember who she was before the war tried to erase her. They talked for hours in whispers after lights out, sharing memories of America like precious treasures. Sachiko described her classroom, the way sunlight streamed through the windows in the afternoon, the sound of children's laughter during recess. Ayako spoke of Seattle's Pike Place Market, the smell of fresh coffee and salmon, the rain that fell like a gentle blessing. These conversations became their rebellion, their refusal to let captivity define them. But survival in the camp required more than memories. It required constant vigilance. The guards played cruel games with the prisoners. They would announce inspections in the middle of the night, forcing the women to stand at attention in the freezing cold for hours. They withheld food as punishment for imagined infractions. They pitted prisoners against each other, offering small privileges to those who informed on their fellow captives. Sachiko watched women break under the pressure, saw dignity stripped away piece by piece. She saw a missionary named Mary collapse during a morning roll call and die in the dirt while guards laughed. She saw a young woman named Helen lose her mind, rocking back and forth and singing lullabies to a doll made of rags. Through it all, Ayako remained Sachiko's anchor. When Sachiko wanted to give up, when death seemed preferable to another day of suffering, Ayako would grip her hand and remind her of what they were fighting for. Not for victory or vengeance, but simply for the chance to go home, to walk on American soil again, to reclaim the lives that had been stolen from them. This hope, fragile as a spider's web, kept them alive through 3 brutal years. Winter of 1944 brought a new level of horror to the camp. American forces were advancing across the Pacific, reclaiming islands one by one, and the Guards' cruelty intensified with each Japanese defeat. Food rations were cut in half. Medical care, already minimal, disappeared entirely. Women began dying at an alarming rate. Sachiko developed a persistent cough that produced blood-flecked phlegm. Ayako's weight dropped until she was skeletal, her eyes enormous in her gaunt face. They both knew they were running out of time. In March 1945, Ayako collapsed during morning inspection. Sachiko caught her before she hit the ground, feeling how light her friend had become, as if she were made of paper and air. The guards shouted at Sachiko to let her fall, but she refused, supporting Ayako's weight as they stumbled back to the barracks. For 2 weeks, Sachiko nursed her friend with nothing but water and the last of their strength. Ayako's fever climbed higher each day. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in delirium. On a gray morning in late March, Ayako opened her eyes with sudden clarity. She gripped Sachiko's hand with surprising strength and pulled her close. "Promise me something," Ayako whispered, her voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll tell our story. Don't let them forget what happened here. Don't let our suffering be for nothing." Sachiko promised through tears, holding her friend as Ayako's breathing grew shallow and finally stopped. The guards took Ayako's body away without ceremony, just another casualty in a war that had already claimed millions. Sachiko's grief transformed into something hard and cold inside her chest. She stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. She moved through her days like a ghost, performing the required tasks with mechanical precision. The other women worried about her, recognizing the signs of someone who had lost the will to live. But Sachiko had made a promise to Ayako, and she intended to keep it. Survival became her mission, her obsession. She would live to tell their story, no matter what it cost her. August 1945 brought rumors that rippled through the camp like electricity. The guards were agitated, speaking in urgent whispers. Something had happened, something big. On August 15th, the camp commander gathered all the prisoners in the main yard. His face was ashen as he made the announcement. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. The women stood in stunned silence, unable to process the information. After years of captivity, freedom seemed like a concept from another lifetime, impossible to grasp. But freedom did not come immediately. The camp remained operational for another 3 weeks while Allied forces worked their way through Japan, establishing control and processing prisoners. During this limbo period, the guards' behavior changed. Some became almost apologetic, as if suddenly aware of their actions. Others grew more hostile, resentful of their defeat. Sachiko kept her head down and waited, afraid to hope, afraid that this was just another cruel trick. September 1945. American forces finally arrived at the camp. Sachiko watched from the barracks window as military trucks rolled through the gates, bearing the White Star insignia she had once taken for granted. Soldiers poured out, and with them came medical personnel in clean uniforms that seemed impossibly bright after years of gray and brown. The prisoners were ordered to assemble in the yard for processing. Sachiko joined the line of skeletal women, barely recognizing herself in their hollow eyes and sunken cheeks. The processing station was set up in what had been the guards' administrative building. Tables were arranged with medical supplies, paperwork, and translators. Sachiko shuffled forward in line, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Fear? Hope? Both? When her turn came, she found herself facing a young American captain with red hair and a clipboard. Captain Richard Thornton looked up at her with professional detachment that didn't quite hide his shock at her condition. "Name?" he asked in English, his voice carefully neutral. The sound of her native language after years of Japanese commands hit Sachiko like a physical blow. Her throat closed up, tears burning her eyes. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Captain Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Take your time," he said more gently. A young soldier appeared at his elbow, a Chinese-American man with kind eyes. "I'm Private William Huang," he said. "I can translate if you need me to." Sachiko shook her head. "No," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. "I speak English. I am English. I'm American." Captain Thornton's eyebrows rose. "You're American?" Sachiko nodded frantically, the words finally pouring out in a desperate rush. Yes, I'm from Los Angeles. I was a teacher at Lincoln Elementary. I came to visit my grandmother in 1941 and I got trapped when the war started. They thought I was a spy. I'm not a spy. I'm American. Please, you have to believe me." She was babbling now, unable to stop, terrified that they wouldn't believe her, that she would be left behind or worse, treated as an enemy. Captain Thornton held up a hand. "Slow down. We'll sort this out." He made notes on his clipboard, asking questions about her background, her family, her life before the war. Private Huang stood by, his presence somehow comforting. As Sachiko answered, she saw the captain's expression shift from skepticism to concern. "You've been here since 1942? he asked. "In this camp?" Sachiko nodded. 3 years. Before that, I was in an interrogation facility for 6 months. Captain Thornton's jaw tightened. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. "Next step is medical evaluation," Captain Thornton said, stamping a form and handing it to her. "Report to the medical tent. They'll check you over and get you cleaned up." Sachiko took the paper with trembling hands. "What happens after that?" she asked. "Where do I go?" The captain's expression was kind but honest. "That depends on verification of your citizenship. We need to confirm your identity and your story. It might take some time." Sachiko's heart sank. More waiting. More uncertainty. But at least she was out of the camp, at least she had a chance. The medical tent was a large canvas structure filled with cots and the sharp smell of disinfectant. Nurses moved efficiently between patients, their movements practiced and sure. Sachiko was directed to a curtained area where she was told to wait. She sat on the edge of a cot, clutching her paperwork, trying to make herself as small as possible. Years of captivity had taught her that invisibility was safety. A nurse appeared through the curtains and Sachiko's breath caught. The woman was tall and blonde, probably in her late 20s, with clear blue eyes and capable hands. She wore the uniform of an army nurse with the rank of lieutenant. "Hello," the nurse said with a warm smile. "I'm Lieutenant Elizabeth Reynolds, but everyone calls me Beth. I'm going to be doing your medical evaluation today." Sachiko nodded mutely, unable to speak. There was something about this woman's kindness that threatened to break through the walls Sachiko had built around herself. Beth began the examination with professional efficiency, checking Sachiko's vital signs, listening to her lungs, examining her skin. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she documented the evidence of malnutrition, untreated infections, and old injuries. When she asked Sachiko to remove her shirt to examine her back, Sachiko hesitated. The scars there were her shame, visible proof of her powerlessness. But Beth's eyes were gentle, and Sachiko slowly complied. The nurse's sharp intake of breath told Sachiko everything she needed to know. The scars were bad. "Who did this to you?" Beth asked quietly, her fingers hovering over the raised welts without touching. "The Kempe Tai," Sachiko whispered. "During interrogation, they wanted information I didn't have." Beth's hands were shaking slightly as she made notes on her chart. "I'm so sorry," she said, and the genuine emotion in her voice made Sachiko's eyes burn with unshed tears. The examination continued in silence for a few minutes. Then Beth said, "I need to check your hair and scalp for lice." "It's standard procedure." Sachiko nodded, expecting Beth to simply look through her hair. Instead, Beth picked up a pair of scissors. "I'm going to need to cut your hair," she said apologetically. "It's too matted, and there's evidence of infestation. I'm sorry, but it's necessary for your health." Sachiko stared at the scissors, her heart beginning to race. Her hair was the last thing she had left from before. It was long, reaching halfway down her back, though now it was tangled and filthy. It was the last connection to the woman she had been. "No," Sachiko heard herself say, her voice rising. "Please no. Not my hair." She was backing away, her body responding with the panic of someone who had lost too much already. Beth immediately set down the scissors and held up her hands. "It's okay," she said soothingly. "We don't have to do it right now. Let's take a break." But Sachiko couldn't stop the panic attack that was building. Her breathing came in short gasps. The tent seemed to be closing in around her. She could hear the guards shouting, feel the bamboo rod striking her back, see Ayako's lifeless eyes. Beth moved quickly, kneeling in front of Sachiko and taking her hands. "Look at me," she said firmly. "Sachiko, look at me. You're safe now. You're not there anymore. You're here with me and you're safe." She repeated the words like a mantra, her voice steady and sure. "You're safe now. You're safe now." Gradually, Sachiko's breathing slowed. The tent came back into focus. She was sitting on a cot in a medical facility, not in a barracks in the mountains. The war was over. She was free. Beth squeezed her hands gently. "That's it. Just breathe. You're doing great." She waited until Sachiko's panic had fully subsided before speaking again. "I understand," Beth said softly. "Your hair is important to you. We'll find another way. Maybe we can wash it first. Work through the tangles slowly. It might take longer, but we can try." Sachiko looked at this American nurse who was showing her more compassion than she had experienced in years, and something inside her cracked open. "She's dead," Sachiko said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "Ayako, my friend. She died in March. She made me promise to tell our story, to not let people forget. But how can I tell a story when I can barely speak, when I can't even keep my hair?" Beth's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You're telling it right now," she said. "And you'll keep telling it one day at a time. But first, we need to get you healthy. Will you let me help you?" Sachiko looked at the scissors lying on the small table. She thought about Ayako, about all the women who hadn't survived to see this day. She thought about the promise she had made, and she realized that holding onto her hair wasn't honoring the past. It was chaining herself to it. "Okay," she whispered. "You can cut it. But please be gentle." Beth picked up the scissors with reverent care. "I promise," she said. "I'll be as gentle as I can." As Beth began to cut, working slowly and carefully through the matted tangles, she talked in a low, soothing voice. She told Sachiko about her own life, about growing up on a farm in Iowa, about joining the Army Nurse Corps because she wanted to make a difference. She talked about the patients she had treated, the soldiers she had helped save. She talked about anything and everything to distract Sachiko from the sound of the scissors, from the sight of her hair falling to the ground in dark clumps. "You know," Beth said as she worked, "hair grows back. It's one of the few things in life that does. It's like a second chance. Every time it grows, it's proof that you're still here, still moving forward." Sachiko closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. When Beth finally finished, Sachiko's hair was cut short, barely reaching her chin. Beth held up a small mirror. "Do you want to look?" she asked gently. Sachiko hesitated, then nodded. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with short dark hair that made her look both younger and older at the same time. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen in years. A spark of life, a possibility of healing. "You're safe now," Beth whispered again. And this time Sachiko believed her. The following weeks were a blur of medical treatments, interviews, and paperwork. Sachiko was moved to a repatriation facility in Manila, a converted hospital where former POWs were being processed for return to their home countries. Beth had requested a transfer to the same facility, telling her superiors that Sachiko needed continuity of care. The truth was more complicated. Beth had seen hundreds of wounded soldiers, had treated injuries that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But something about Sachiko's story, about her quiet resilience, had touched Beth deeply. She felt a responsibility to see this through, to make sure Sachiko made it home. The facility was crowded with former prisoners from camps across the Pacific, Australian soldiers who had survived the Burma Railway, Dutch civilians from internment camps in Indonesia, American servicemen from camps in Japan and the Philippines. They were all skeletal, all traumatized, all struggling to reconcile the people they had been with the people they had become. Sachiko found herself among ghosts, people who moved through the world but weren't quite part of it anymore. Private William Huang became an unexpected ally. As one of the facility's translators, he worked closely with the Japanese-American internees, helping them navigate the complex process of proving their citizenship. Will understood Sachiko's situation in a way that others couldn't. His own family had been sent to Manzanar internment camp in California while he was serving overseas. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had fought for a country that imprisoned his parents for the crime of their ancestry. "The thing is," Will told Sachiko one afternoon as they sat in the facility's small courtyard, "we have to believe it gets better. We have to believe that what we went through meant something, that it'll make the country stronger, more just. Because if we don't believe that, then what was it all for?" Sachiko appreciated his optimism, even if she couldn't quite share it. Her faith in justice had been beaten out of her in that interrogation room in 1942. Captain Thornton was working tirelessly to verify Sachiko's identity. He had sent telegrams to Los Angeles, to Lincoln Elementary, to anyone who might remember a young Japanese-American teacher who had disappeared in 1941. The responses came back slowly, filtered through a postal system still recovering from war. But gradually, the pieces came together. The principal at Lincoln Elementary confirmed that Sachiko Kimura had been a teacher there. A neighbor in Little Tokyo remembered the young woman who had left to visit her grandmother. The verification process was agonizingly slow, but each confirmation was another step toward home. During this time, Beth continued to work with Sachiko on her physical and emotional recovery. The physical wounds were easier to address. With proper nutrition, Sachiko began to gain weight. Her cough improved with medication. The infections cleared up, but the psychological scars were deeper, more resistant to healing. Sachiko had nightmares every night, waking up screaming, convinced she was back in the camp. She couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. Loud noises sent her diving for cover. She flinched whenever anyone approached her too quickly. Beth introduced Sachiko to other nurses who had experience with what they were beginning to call battle fatigue or shell shock. These nurses had seen it in soldiers. The way trauma rewired the brain, made the body remember danger long after the threat had passed. They taught Sachiko techniques for managing her panic attacks, for grounding herself in the present when her mind tried to drag her back to the past. It was slow work, frustrating work, but gradually Sachiko began to reclaim small pieces of herself. One evening, Beth found Sachiko sitting alone in the courtyard, staring at the sunset. "Mind if I join you?" Beth asked. Sachiko shook her head, and Beth sat down beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Finally, Sachiko spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Beth considered the question carefully. "Because you deserve to be cared about," she said simply. "Because what happened to you was wrong, and I can't fix it, but I can try to help you move forward. And because I think you're incredibly brave." Sachiko shook her head. "I'm not brave. I just survived. That's not the same thing." Beth turned to look at her. "Surviving is the bravest thing you could have done. You could have given up. God knows you had reason to. But you didn't. You held on. You made a promise to your friend and you're keeping it. That's courage, Sachiko. That's real courage." Sachiko felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She had cried so much in recent weeks after years of forcing herself not to cry, not to show weakness. "I don't know how to go back," she whispered. "I don't know how to be the person I was before." "Maybe you don't have to be that person," Beth said gently. "Maybe you get to be someone new. Someone who carries what happened but isn't defined by it. Someone who knows how strong she really is." Sachiko wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that there was a future beyond survival, beyond just existing from one day to the next. But belief was hard when your faith had been systematically destroyed. October 1945 brought the news Sachiko had been waiting for. Captain Thornton appeared at her door with a folder of papers and a smile. "Your citizenship has been verified," he said. "You're cleared for repatriation. There's a ship leaving for San Francisco next week. You'll be on it." Sachiko stared at him, unable to process the information. Home. She was going home. After 4 years of captivity, of believing she might never see America again, she was going home. The reality of it hit her all at once, and she burst into tears. Captain Thornton looked alarmed, but Beth, who had followed him, immediately moved to Sachiko's side. "It's okay," Beth told the captain. "These are good tears." The week before departure was a whirlwind of final medical checks, paperwork, and preparations. Sachiko was issued new clothes to replace the ill-fitting donated items she had been wearing. She was given a small stipend to help her get settled once she reached California. She was provided with documentation proving her identity and her status as a former prisoner of war. Each item was a small miracle, a piece of the life she was reclaiming. The night before the ship was scheduled to leave, Beth came to Sachiko's room with a small package. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing it to Sachiko. Inside was a journal, bound in leather, with blank pages waiting to be filled. "For your story," Beth explained. "For Ayako's story. For all the stories that need to be told." Sachiko held the journal like it was made of glass. "I don't know if I can," she said. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to relive it all." Beth sat down beside her. "You don't have to do it all at once. Start small. Write one memory, then another. Let it out slowly, at your own pace. But don't let it stay locked inside you. That's where it becomes poison." "Will I ever be normal again?" Sachiko asked, the question she had been afraid to voice. Beth took her hand. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think what you went through changes you forever. But change doesn't have to mean broken. You can be changed and still be whole. You can carry scars and still be beautiful. You can remember the darkness and still find light." Sachiko squeezed Beth's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for believing me, for caring, for reminding me that I'm human." Beth's eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, "for letting me be part of your healing." The next morning, Sachiko boarded the USS General M.C. Meigs, a troopship converted for repatriating prisoners and displaced persons. The deck was crowded with people, all of them carrying their own stories of survival and loss. Sachiko stood at the rail, watching Manila's harbor recede into the distance. Beth stood beside her, having arranged to be on the same ship. She was being reassigned to a military hospital in San Francisco, a coincidence that felt like fate. The journey across the Pacific took 2 weeks. Sachiko spent most of her time on deck, staring at the endless expanse of water. The ocean that had trapped her in Japan now carried her home. There was poetry in that, though she wasn't sure if it was beautiful or cruel. She began writing in the journal Beth had given her, starting with small memories: the smell of her classroom, the taste of her grandmother's cooking, Ayako's laugh. Each memory was a thread, and slowly, she was weaving them into something that made sense, a narrative she could hold on to. Other passengers shared their stories too. A Dutch woman who had been interned with her children in Java, an Australian soldier who had survived 3 years on the Burma Railway, an American pilot who had been shot down over the Philippines. They formed a community of survivors, bound together by their shared trauma and their shared hope for the future. They didn't talk much about what they had endured. The details were too raw, too painful, but they understood each other in a way that others couldn't. They had all walked through hell and somehow made it out the other side. Beth watched Sachiko slowly come back to life during the voyage. She saw her smile for the first time, a small, tentative expression that transformed her face. She saw her laugh at something Private Huang said, a sound that was rusty but genuine. She saw her standing at the rail at sunrise, her short hair ruffling in the wind, looking not backward but forward. These small moments felt like victories, proof that healing was possible, that the human spirit could bend without breaking. November 1945. The ship passed under the Golden Gate Bridge on a clear, cold morning. Sachiko stood at the rail, tears streaming down her face as San Francisco came into view. The city was beautiful, all white buildings and steep hills, exactly as she remembered it. She was home. After 4 years of captivity, of believing she might never see this sight again, she was finally home. The other passengers crowded around her, sharing in her joy, understanding what this moment meant. The disembarkation process was chaotic. The dock was crowded with military personnel, Red Cross workers, and families waiting for their loved ones. Sachiko moved through the crowd in a daze, clutching her small bag of belongings and her precious journal. Beth stayed close, guiding her through the processing stations, making sure she wasn't lost in the confusion. Captain Thornton had arranged for Sachiko to stay at a Red Cross facility in San Francisco while she figured out her next steps. Los Angeles felt too far away, too overwhelming. She needed time to adjust, to remember how to be a person in the world again. The Red Cross facility was a converted hotel that housed former POWs and refugees. Sachiko was given a small room on the 3rd floor, the first private space she had had in years. She stood in the middle of the room, looking at the bed with its clean white sheets, the window with its view of the city, the small bathroom with running hot water. These simple things felt like impossible luxuries. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried, overwhelmed by the enormity of being free, of being safe, of being home. Beth visited her every day during her off-duty hours. They would walk through the city, Sachiko slowly relearning how to navigate crowds, how to be around people without fear. Beth introduced her to other nurses, to doctors, to social workers who specialized in helping former prisoners readjust to civilian life. Slowly, Sachiko began to build a support network, people who understood what she had been through and could help her move forward. Private Huang, who had also been reassigned to San Francisco, became a regular visitor too. He brought news from other Japanese-American internees who were being released from camps across the West. The stories were heartbreaking. Families who had lost everything, businesses that had been seized, homes that had been sold. The Japanese-American community was scattered, traumatized, uncertain about their place in a country that had imprisoned them. Will was working with advocacy groups trying to help families rebuild, fighting for reparations and recognition of the injustice that had been done. He asked Sachiko if she would be willing to share her story, to add her voice to the chorus demanding accountability. Sachiko wasn't sure she was ready. Speaking about what had happened meant reliving it, and she was barely holding herself together as it was. But she thought about Ayako's last words, about the promise she had made. She thought about all the women who hadn't survived to tell their stories, and she realized that she had a responsibility, not just to Ayako, but to all of them. "I'll do it," she told Will. "I'll tell my story, but I need time. I need to be stronger first." Will nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. When you're ready, we'll be here." Christmas 1945 arrived, the first peacetime Christmas in 4 years. The city was decorated with lights and wreaths, and there was a feeling of celebration in the air. But for Sachiko, the holiday was bittersweet. She thought about her grandmother, wondered if she was still alive, if she had survived the war. She thought about Ayako, about the Christmas they had spent in the camp, huddled together for warmth, singing carols in whispers. She thought about all the holidays she had missed, all the years that had been stolen from her. Beth invited Sachiko to spend Christmas with her and some of the other nurses. They gathered in a small apartment, sharing food and stories, trying to create normalcy out of the chaos of their lives. Sachiko sat quietly, listening to the others talk, feeling both part of the group and separate from it. These women had their own war stories, their own traumas, but they hadn't been prisoners. They hadn't been beaten, starved, stripped of their humanity. There was a gulf between them that Sachiko wasn't sure could be bridged. But then Beth raised a glass and proposed a toast. "To survival," she said, looking directly at Sachiko. "To everyone who made it through the darkness, to the ones we lost, and to the future we're building together." Everyone drank, and Sachiko felt something shift inside her. Maybe she didn't have to bridge the gulf alone. Maybe these people, with their kindness and their acceptance, could help build the bridge with her. January 1946 brought news that Sachiko's grandmother had died during the war, a victim of the firebombing of Hiroshima. The news hit Sachiko hard. Her grandmother had been her last connection to Japan, to the part of her heritage that felt increasingly complicated. She mourned not just her grandmother's death, but the relationship they might have had, the years they had lost. Beth held her while she cried, offering no platitudes, no false comfort, just presence and understanding. In February, Sachiko made the decision to return to Los Angeles. It was time to face her old life, to see what remained of the world she had left behind. Beth arranged to take leave and accompany her, unwilling to let Sachiko face this alone. They took the train south, watching California pass by the windows. Sachiko pressed her face to the glass, drinking in the sight of her home state. The golden hills, the sprawling farms, the small towns that dotted the landscape. It was all achingly familiar and utterly foreign at the same time. Los Angeles had changed. Little Tokyo, once a vibrant community, was nearly empty. Most of the Japanese-American families had been interned and hadn't yet returned. The businesses were shuttered, the streets quiet. Sachiko walked through her old neighborhood like a ghost, seeing the past superimposed over the present. There was the grocery store where she used to buy rice. There was the temple where she had attended festivals. There was the apartment building where she had lived. It was all still there, but the life had been drained out of it. Lincoln Elementary was still standing, though it looked smaller than she remembered. Sachiko stood outside the gates, staring at the building where she had spent so many happy hours. Beth stood beside her, silent support. "Do you want to go in?" Beth asked gently. Sachiko shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready." They turned away, walking back toward the hotel where they were staying. But Sachiko knew she would return. She would walk through those doors again. She would reclaim her place in the world, piece by piece. Over the following months, Sachiko slowly rebuilt her life. She reconnected with former colleagues, found a small apartment, and began volunteering with organizations helping former internees. Most importantly, she continued writing in the journal Beth had given her, documenting everything she and Ayako had endured. By spring 1946, Sachiko felt strong enough to share her story publicly. With Will's help, she testified before government committees investigating war crimes and the treatment of POWs. Her words were measured but powerful, bearing witness to the cruelty she had survived and honoring the women who hadn't made it home. Each testimony was painful, but also liberating. She was keeping her promise to Ayako. Beth remained Sachiko's closest friend and fiercest advocate. Their bond, forged in that medical tent in Manila, had grown into something unbreakable. Beth helped Sachiko navigate a world that didn't always understand trauma, that expected survivors to simply move on and be grateful. Together, they learned that healing wasn't linear, that some scars never fully faded, but that survival itself was a form of victory. In September 1946, Sachiko returned to teaching. Standing in a new classroom watching new students take their seats, she felt Ayako's presence beside her. She had survived. She had told their story. She had refused to let the war define her, even as she carried its marks. And in those 3 whispered words, "You're safe now," Beth had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. The war had taken years from Sachiko, had stolen her innocence and tested her spirit. But it hadn't broken her. She was still here, still fighting, still remembering. And that, she realized, was the greatest act of resistance she could offer. Her story became part of the historical record, a testament to resilience and the power of human compassion in the darkest times. Sachiko Kimura had been invisible in her own skin during the war, seen as the enemy by both sides. But she refused to remain invisible. She made sure her voice, and Ayako's voice, would echo through history. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II. Hit the like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. History deserves to be remembered, and these voices deserve to be heard.